Evening, and welcome to our final week of events of this school year. We're pleased to welcome tonight General David Petraeus to campus. General Petraeus, as you know, is a legendary figure in the U.S. military and in American governance. We had the chance to work together a bit when I was in the administration in Washington, and we're really honored that you've made the time. And he's at the end of a long transcontinental journey here, so I just spent an hour with him on a podcast. He doesn't seem any the worse for wear, but we very much appreciate you making the time to be with us. And here to formally introduce our speaker is Yang Xiang. Yang is a PhD student in sociology from Sichuan, China. He's been an active participant in IOP events. In fact, usually the first at the microphone for the questions. Are you going to double back? And always has an insightful question to ask our guests. Please join me in welcoming Yang to the podium.
American global leadership is being watched and is being tested on a number of fronts. This year alone, the United States has to respond to regime change in Venezuela and alleged threats from Iran. Additionally, we've seen a trade war with China, US's #1 trading partner, as well as its potential #1 strategic rival. As a student coming from China, I'm deeply concerned with the escalating trade dispute spilling over into technology and perhaps into many other domains. Are the two sides playing the art of the deal or the art of the bluff? Will the world see another Cold War or a Cold Peace or perhaps deeper cooperation and integration? No one is perhaps more eligible to provide wisdom in these issues and other foreign policy concerns than our four-star General David Petraeus. With military career spanning over 37 years, Mr. Petraeus is considered one of the most effective military leaders or great battle captains of recent American history. From 2004 to 2011, he served as head of the multinational forces in Iraq, commander of the coalition forces in Iraq, and commander of US and NATO forces in Afghanistan. His command during these years has earned him the comparisons to Ulysses Grant, John Pershing, George Marshall, and Dwight Eisenhower. I knew all these names. Following his military service, he was director of CIA from 2011 to 2012 under President Obama. In short, General Petraeus is one of the few Americans in uniform who managed to combine the technical side of warfare, tactics, and operation with a broader grand strategy, diplomacy, and communication. He is now a partner with a global investment firm, KKR, where he chairs the Global Institute. Moderating this conversation is Natasha Bertrand. She's the National Security Correspondent for Political and an MSNBC contributor. It is my privilege to do this introduction, and please join me in welcoming both of them.
In fact, to build a little bit on the kind introduction of the student from China, I firmly believe that the most important relationship in the world right now is that between the US and China. It is China, China, China. Keeping in mind, by the way, that I fervently would like to see this be mutually beneficial and not zero-sum, certainly with my eyes wide open about the challenges that each side has presented to the other, the activities of China for which they have been called out, not just by this administration, but by other administrations, and a recognition of a bipartisan consensus that certain assumptions we had that if we welcome China to the WTO and so forth, have actually not borne out. It hasn't become more open, more transparent, more like us that has actually reversed somewhat. Having said that, again, they're not just our biggest strategic competitor, they are also among our biggest trading partners. Canada, Mexico, and China, far and away, again, are the big trading partners. It's a hugely important market. The firm in which I'm invested is, I think, the biggest investor of our type in China, as well as Japan and India and a lot of else in Asia and so forth. So this is a relationship I'd like to see work, but in the meantime, as you are going to present issues to them, you want to do that with a united front. And so every decision, I think, that we take when it comes to any kind of foreign policy should have to answer a question, what will this do to the US-China relationship? And therefore, for that reason, and I wrote about this at the time, I felt very strongly that we should support the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And by the way, not for the modest economic gains that it would provide for us. Most economists thought it would be well under even just 0.5% of GDP that we would benefit, but more because of the geostrategic importance of, again, helping to present a united front. Again, if you're going to negotiate with another country, you want as many folks on your side, and we uniquely enjoy enormous number of allies, not just with NATO Europe, the most successful alliance, I think, in history, but also with South Korea, with Japan, with Australia and New Zealand, and then partnerships with another number of other countries. And in fact, our Indo-Pacific Partnership does reflect a number of factors that would be part of what I've called for, actually, in a monograph at the Belfer Center at Harvard, and it was titled Coherence and Comprehensiveness, an American Foreign Policy Imperative, implying that that's what we should seek. Again, if you're going to deal with China, you want to do it, again, with as many folks on your side as you possibly can muster. And it's a very, very tricky situation to, on the one hand, call on an ally to do what that ally's leader agreed that that country would do at the Wales Summit, but then to go too far. And I think occasionally, certainly some of the rhetoric that has been employed would not be what I would have advised. I think it is correct. We are in an era, once again, of great power rivalries, the most important of which is, far and away, is that between the US and China. Now, it doesn't mean that it can't also be mutually beneficial. And my hope, again, is that we could restore the kind of trust and confidence and so forth. But I do fear that we are already in the early stages of a degree of a tech Cold War. At the very least, I think there are going to be supply chain reverberations just from a result of what has transpired so far. That does not mean it has to go all the way into a true Cold War, and one would hope that we would draw back. And as David said in his opening, is this or actually maybe you did in your introduction, is this the negotiating tactics, keeping in mind that we have someone who wrote a book called The Art of the Deal, in which he explains that before you sit down across the table and negotiate with someone, you punch the other guy in the nose. I mean, we're doing that to Mexico right now.
Hi, General. Just wanted to thank you for being here. My name is Xander. I'm a first year at the college. You mentioned earlier in the event, in the conversation, that you thought we were entering a renewed era of security competition with other great powers. So I wanted to get your opinion on your thoughts on working with those great powers and addressing issues in the Middle East going forward.
Well, when I'm talking about the competition among great powers, I'm really talking about the resurgence of Russia with Vladimir Putin, and certainly it's not a resurgence across the board. I forget who it was that said that Russia is now a gas station with guns or a gas station with nukes or something like that. But don't get me wrong, this is a gas station that really matters. And of course, until our energy revolution propelled us to be #1 in crude oil production, oil liquids production, and natural gas production, Russia was riding very, very high. But still has such extraordinary resources and still a lot of other attributes that allow it to play a very big role on the stage, especially with Putin, who loves to walk the global stage and loves in particular to poke the US in the eye, and now is actually doing agreements with China, which I think has a very transactional view of the relationship, doesn't see Russia in remotely the same league as China, nor should it, but still a convenient relationship to have. And then the other big relationship, obviously, is the competition is the one that I talked about earlier, which is one which, again, paradoxically, when we were faced off with the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War, we didn't do much trading at all. We occasionally sold some excess wheat or some other goods to Russia, but very, very little in the way of trade. Again, with China, one of our top 3 trading partners. Certainly China more dependent on that by several orders of magnitude than we are, but still a very, very important relationship in that regard. That's the competition and also the relationship, again, that matters most. In Africa, in the Gulf, in other places, certainly throughout Southeast and Southern Asia and all the way through Eurasia, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is being pursued by China under President Xi, has a lot of economic consequences and implications. There have been, I think, legitimate concerns raised about some of the financing terms, if you will, that some have characterized as a bit more neo-colonialism than development aid, the way that, say, Japan or the US or the EU or European countries would provide it. But again, there is a certain degree of competition that is represented by that. And in fact, the US is starting to get back into that in a way. We've doubled the size of our this separate development bank. And we are partnering with Japan and other major donors to provide alternatives, if you will, to what China could offer. And with different terms, I might add as well, though even China, by the way, is actually making changes as a result of some of the experiences. But that's a serious competition. And again, it is playing out. One hopes it doesn't become a true Cold War the way we experienced for so many decades after the end of World War II, and that this can be a beneficial relationship to both sides. But again, you see signs already, as I said, of a degree of tech fracture, of tech Cold War, that I think already has ramifications that you're starting to see when it comes to supply chain concerns and that kind of development. So does that answer what you were after, or?
I just want to know specifically like how we could leverage our relationships with Russia and China to coordinate and address issues in the Middle East, just given your vast experience in the region.
Well, Russia has not been a particularly helpful partner, candidly, in the Middle East. You look at what they've done to prop up Bashar al-Assad. They feel deeply huge grievance about the fact that a UN Security Council resolution was passed for a humanitarian action in Libya that turned into toppling Gaddafi. Russia sees there are conspiracy theories here everywhere that, the Ukrainian and the Maidan, the big upheaval there was actually U.S. instigated to take the bloom off Russia in the wake of the Sochi Olympics, that great triumph, all of this kind of stuff. So again, I don't think you're going to see, it's not to say there aren't some common interests. It's not to say that in Syria that you don't have a common interest against Islamist extremists, or in Afghanistan for that. I was supposed to go to Moscow at one point when I think I was Central Command Commander, and I was going to lay out the 3 big common interests that we had. Again, against Islamist extremism, against the illegal narcotics trade that was coming out of Afghanistan in particular, and also for the economic development of the Central Asian states. Didn't get to do that. But again, you can always, and certainly you should have strategic dialogue with your competitors. I think one of the great developments, the abilities of Henry Kissinger to talk with Russia, talk with China, to talk with others, to establish true strategic dialogue was very, very helpful in subsequent developments and got arms control in the midst of the Cold War. I actually want to end, if I could, just with something for the students, in addition to my thanks to everyone for being here so late into the evening at the end of an academic year. And that is, for the students, when I'm asked, what is it that you think is the most important element in success? And, you know, there's all the usual ones about working hard and, you know, don't do drugs and don't post stupid stuff on social media that will haunt you when you try to go to the CIA. I mean, all these kind of, but you all know that. But one that is not quite, I don't think, is just sort of universally recognized is the value of seeking, actually performing out of your intellectual comfort zone experiences. And I mean, this is why I went to graduate school instead of, say, to an infantry unit again. And I was told I was committing professional suicide at the time. It didn't quite work out that way. And that turned out to be an incredible experience. Instead of doing the War College, I did a fellowship at Georgetown. And then instead of completing the fellowship, I went to Haiti with the UN. I mean, these were unbelievable in terms of development. And again, get out of your intellectual comfort zone. Experience people whose views are different. Talk to actual Chinese students and visit that country. These are the kinds of experiences that I think stand you in very good stead when years later you're thrust into something that is completely unexpected, like being the commander of all of northern Iraq, when nobody was giving us any guidance, and when happily, because of some of these experiences and study and dissertation and a variety of other activities, we sort of didn't lack for guidance. We didn't need some guidance, frankly, and that was okay with us, and generally did what made reasonable sense, produced decent outcomes, and later became the core of what we ultimately did during the surge, which drove violence down by 85% and gave Iraq a whole new opportunity for life. So that would be my one bit of advice for the students who are here, along with, again, my thanks to all of you for being here and for staying with us throughout a very stimulating endeavor, and thanks for being my interrogator, not the doctor.